Hi, everybody. I'm hi, Margot and Shola. There we go.
Okay, here I am.
There we go. Amazing. Amazing. So thank you everybody for coming. For those of you who haven't been before, we meet monthly in Room Key. We talk about all different kinds of diversity, inclusion and equity topics. We have amazing speakers every month, and there's always time at the end for a bit of networking and chit-chatting and getting to know each other. And, you know, people actually do get in contact after these things and form direct relationships. And I've even met someone for coffee who happened to live in my hometown after one of these events who I'd only ever previously met as an avatar. So great things can come of this. Today we have an amazing talk from our speaker Shola, who I will introduce in a minute. She's quite out of this world in some of the things that she has done, so I'll introduce her in a minute. But just before we do that, I just want to go through just the kind of the organizational, operational, you know, the boring side of things, really. So we're going to get started in a minute. Shola will be obviously leading the session. There'll be some interactive elements to it, and then we'll aim to move to Q&A probably about 22, and then networking about 10 to. The times may not work exactly, but something along those lines. If for any reason you're having problems speaking, then you probably need to unmute yourself. If for any reason you're having other kind of sound issues, you may need to plug in headphones. If you want to move tables, you just need to click on a chair, an empty chair, and you should move quite swiftly onto that chair. And that is probably all you need to know. Oh, you'll notice a little recording sign at the top of your screen. We are not going to be recording all of your private conversations on your tables and broadcasting them to the world. We are just recording it because it helps Margot, who I'll introduce in a minute, to do a write-up. And occasionally we do little video clips of the speaker that we kind of put out to the world afterwards, but only with the speaker's consent. But don't worry that your questions and your conversations are not being recorded. Margot on my left, your right, and Margot is our community and comms lead. She will be writing up an amazing blog of the event afterwards, so if any of your friends and colleagues weren't able to come, they'll be able to read all about it. And she'll also be running the Q&A for us as well, and doing lots of behind the scenes things like sharing slides and what have you. Just maybe practice some emojis. If you can all like give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, that would be lovely. That's the green thing. Amazing. That looks like everybody. Excellent. And a heart or a happy sign if you're happy. And you may also cry if you're sad. Hoping we don't get too many tears. Amazing. Right, no tears. Good. Right, let's get started then. So Shola, welcome. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. So Shola, everybody, is an award-winning speaker. She speaks normally in front of huge live audiences globally. She is an expert in empathy, in diversity, equity, and inclusion. She runs workshops, she coaches, she has done a TEDx, right? I mean, I am in awe of anyone who has done a TEDx. Her clients include people like American Express, Deloitte, and even the United Nations. She's regularly featured in the press, including on the BBC here in the UK. She has a blog, she has podcasts. There's lots of things that you can do after this event to hear more from her. And a little known fact, she's also a professional singer, although I don't know if she's going to sing for us today, but I suspect not. So welcome, please. Round of applause. That's the blue clapping hands. Say hi.
Thank you so much, Davina. And yeah, that's a very lovely introduction. And this is the very first time that I've done anything like this with an avatar. So it's super exciting to be here. And I'd love to, I'm super interactive with this. So I'd love you to pop in the chat out there in the audience. Why did you come along to this session today? What appealed to you about empathy at work? typing. I'd love to know. It's always interesting to me to know what it is that you came for, so we can give you more of that. So while those comments are
Excellent.
coming in, yeah, sorry, Davina.
I was going to say,
Carry on.
once those comments are coming in, shall I kick off? I think, Shola, it'd be amazing to hear from you about how you first became interested in empathy at work, because it is quite a niche and unusual subject, I would say.
Yeah, it is, and the great thing is that there's a growing interest in it as a subject, and it's so broad. It touches so many different areas of our lives. So obviously, it affects our personal relationships in the workplace. It has implications in terms of engagement, customer satisfaction, innovation, creativity. It just touches everything, including obviously diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's a wonderful topic, and I'm so grateful to be sort of somebody that speaks on it. But for me, the starting point was really that I originally worked in scientific research, and like a lot of people who work in tech and the sciences, we don't necessarily have a lot of training initially in communication skills. So my first corporate job was in the States, and I was working for a consulting firm. And as a consultant, obviously you're supposed to be a pretty decent communicator and helping share ideas for your clients and so on. And I was pretty awful. And what happened is quite soon into working for this company, they decided that instead of giving me some training or getting me a mentor, they put me on probation. And that was a real shock to me as somebody who'd always been quite a high achiever. So managed to, with the help of a colleague, sort of get around that and stay at the company for a while. But then when I moved back to the UK, a very similar thing happened. And I found that I was at a firm for 6 months. Instead of this idea of developing their staff and helping them to sort of do better, what happened for me was 6 months in, this was right around the time of the Twin Towers coming down, and the aviation industry was affected very badly, and our clients were in aviation. So once again, got called into the managing director's office, and this time I was actually just fired on the spot. And as you can imagine, it's quite a shock to me. And I kind of took myself away from corporate for a number of years because I just felt that it wasn't a place where, somebody could be, could flourish if you weren't being developed and invested in. So anyway, years later, I had an opportunity to do a TEDx talk, and it seemed that looking back, there was a sort of lack of empathy on the part of my employers. And so I decided to talk about empathy in the workplace and sort of look at it from the perspective of the sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion sort of area. And so I just found that there was a lot of interest in that as a topic. And actually, every time I talk about some of the ways that corporations can treat people, there's always at least two or three people in the audience that say, yes, that happened to me, or I know someone that happened to. So although I think people who are in employment are a little reluctant to talk about that sort of thing, um, I, 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 for me as a speaker who's self-employed, I think it's important to share some of the stories of things that go on, and how companies can kind of rectify that behavior. So that's part of what I do when I speak to audiences.
I think that's great, Ashel. I mean, very moving story, but also I agree. Just that shining the light on the things that go on and making the problems more visible is really important for all of us to do. But I know you've been incredibly busy over the last year, and you've been delivering sessions all around the world, or at least the clients have been around the world. I'm guessing you haven't been with COVID, but in the US and Europe. I'm guessing from this demand that empathy at work is something that's becoming increasingly important to people. Why do you think this is?
Yeah, I think it very much is, and even in terms of my TEDx, which I did 2, 3 years ago, there wasn't a great deal of, there was a bit of interest. There always is when a TEDx talk comes out, but I'm seeing a lot more interest in it now as a topic, and people are actually searching for empathy speakers. And I think obviously what with COVID, I mean, and with Black Lives Matter and all that's happening in the world, there's a lot more need for people to be able to put themselves in the shoes of somebody else, to understand what's going on, and to be empathetic and listen as well. And I see empathy as being a sort of red carpet for a lot of the work that we do, whether it's communication, whether it's inclusion. I feel as though that empathy skills should be the first step really for individuals and for companies, because I think unless you can put yourself in the shoes of somebody else and understand what they're going through, even if you can't understand easily, at least you can listen. You can listen and try and get someone else's perspective. And so I feel that this should really be the sort of kickoff point. And I do have a slide. I think I've called it, Margot. It's called the Empathy to Equity Blueprint. It's I think that's slide number 8, I believe. Um, maybe it's later than that. But I do have a slide anyway on that, and I'll just pop it up because I feel like there's a big rush for companies to do these sort of quite performative, but sometimes quite sort of flimsy um, bias trainings, for example. I don't know if any of you've had experience of those, but a lot of them are little sort of CBT checkbox exercises. And one of my clients actually asked me to look at one of those sorts of trainings a couple of days ago, and they might be good at just raising some basic awareness, but they're so not the sort of trainings that will stay with people, and you know, that tell stories of people that they've really experienced in real life. So I think first of all, this idea of empathy is so important because of actually hearing people's stories. And also, seeing a big trend at the moment in, they call them proximity sessions or listening sessions or proximity conversations. And Brian Stevenson, I'm not sure how many of you have heard of him, but he's a lawyer who does a lot of work with sort of trying to stop minors from having to be in adult prisons in the States. And he coined this term, proximity conversations. And the idea is that you have sort of senior leaders or people within organizations who actually get close enough to others, people who are different than them, that they actually listen to their stories and really understand where those people are coming from. And the idea is that these proximity conversations are as effective, if not more so, than a lot of the interventions that, you know, we're used to, which is like the, you know, the unconscious bias training, or even things like anonymizing resumes. So yeah, there's definitely a growing trend towards listening better, even having senior leaders meet one-to-one with people on their staff so that they can actually have these conversations, listen without having to fix immediately, but just listen, and then later on mull over what's going on, decide what's needed for the entire organization. So it's good to see that this is happening. And actually, there is a slide. I can't even see the slides where I'm sitting, but there's another slide which we can pull up, which is slide number. I
They
think
should be
it's the one
down by
with.
your feet, actually,
Oh,
Shirley. If
okay.
you look kind of by
I'll
your
have a look.
feet, you'll see them. You've got your own little screen there.
Click to where my feet are. There we go. Yeah, perfect. So yeah, the one that's up right now is this sort of empathy to equity program, which is what I think the area. This is, I think, the order that these sorts of DEI initiatives should go in. So I think it should start with the empathy at work, which is really fundamental. And I think a lot of people who are reluctant to get involved with DEI, or you know, they think that unconscious bias doesn't exist. I think people can, at a basic human relationship uh, standpoint, they can come in and they can understand the importance of empathy. And so then once you kind of help break them down a bit with understanding empathy and the value of listening, then we can start to introduce a lot of the other programs that companies typically have, like, you know, the unconscious bias training or inclusive leadership, allyship, microaggressions, you know, the communication side of things. But I feel as though there's a lot of people that need to be brought on side first with empathy before it goes further. And the other slide I wanted to show you is number 5, please, Margot. And I think this is really interesting because, Josh, I think it should have a blue band at the top, please, Margot. It says organisations that listen. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. So yeah, Josh Bersin is an HR consultant in the States, and he looked at 840 companies, and this study just came out in February. He looked at 840 companies of different industries, different sizes, and what he found was that of all those different interventions, the most important one is when companies listen and they hear what the employers are saying and they actually act and put things in place. And this is the most effective, and also it leads to employee retention, it leads to satisfied customers, leads to belonging. It's just amazing what the simple act of listening can do. And this corresponds to empathy, it corresponds to what we call compassionate empathy, where we listen and we act. So it's great to see more and more companies understanding that and putting these sorts of um, listening skills and conversations in place. Definitely.
So when you talk about listening, I think that you're talking about listening, and probably not in the way that we're talking about listening day to day. I think you mentioned empathetic or empathetic listening. Is that right? Is that what you're calling it? And what does it mean?
Yeah, thank you. I think some people call it empathetic, some people call it empathic, but as long as we know it's got something to do with empathy, that's fine. And yeah, I mean, we see it so much on social media, even the way someone might put down their experience, they write about what happened to them, and then everybody weighs in with their opinion and says, well, you shouldn't feel that way, or when it happened to me, I responded differently. And it seems like people don't give others the space to just have their lived experience and just to respect the experience that somebody has. And empathic listening is really taking a step back from reacting to what people say, and it's really about just listening without the challenge, without the debate, without questioning, without giving your own opinion. But it's really all about just listening carefully and asking questions to help the speaker open up and listening until we truly understand what that person has been through. And I think what happens is we're so quick these days to jump in with our own opinion, or we're so quick to debate and challenge that half the time people don't even fully share their experiences with us. And one of the things that I hear the most is when I go in and run training on empathy for teams, sort of frontline teams or people on the ground, they all say, oh, our leaders really need to hear this. Are you doing something for the leaders? Because they don't listen. And so, as I say, it's good to see that more and more leaders are listening, but I think this is just the beginning. It needs to be much more widespread than this. And there is a slide with different listeners. If we could go to that one, I think it's slide number. Let's see here. Slide. I'm just trying to find it. Oh, okay. I don't think it's here. That's fine. But there are different kinds of empathy. So let's go to. Sorry, I'm just trying to find my slides. Okay, so there's different kinds of empathy. I'll share them with you now. So there's three kinds. So there's one which is called it's more like perspective taking. So it's called cognitive empathy, and that's really great for creativity, for innovation. Then the second kind of empathy is what most of us understand to be empathy, which is when you feel what somebody else feels, and so that is sometimes called social empathy. And social empathy is really helpful in terms of us understanding what other people are going through. But one of the problems with social empathy is that we feel that we're being tugged around emotionally. So if somebody around you is feeling very upset and you feel upset, it's quite debilitating, right? Versus the third kind of empathy, which is called mammalian empathy or empathic concern, or just showing compassion. And with this kind of empathy, it's actually associated with reward, with feeling good. Because what we do is we understand someone's situation and we try and do something about it. And that could be just listening. We just listen until they feel that they've been heard. Or it might be we listen and then we try and help them, or we try and help them help themselves. And so it's much more powerful to move through the different stages of empathy until we get to this compassionate empathy, which is what the sort of a lot of these companies are trying to do with this listening, these listening and proximity sessions. It's more empowering than simply just listening and then saying, oh, I feel really bad for you, but nothing else happens.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Shola. So, in our organisations, if the organisation as a whole wants to become more empathetic and change its cultures, what are some of the barriers and challenges to making that move?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Somebody had put in the chat there, I think, about as people get, I think it was Shahad that put in the chat. She said, as a business owner, the higher in leadership I get in my business, the more people I manage, the more feedback I need on empathy, because there are more gaps between me and the employee. And she's so right there, because basically what happens is as people become more powerful, they've actually shown it by looking at people's brains. They become less dependent on others. And what that means is as they become less dependent, they become less able to be empathetic. So it's super important that organizations sort of understand that the leaders, it is harder for them to be empathetic because they just have lost started to lose the skills. So a lot of it is around creating an environment of safety, of psychological safety, and helping people to know that when they speak up, they won't be penalized, they'll be listened to, they'll be heard. And there's a really great model for psychological safety that comes from a book called The Coaching Habit. And in that, he talks about this framework called the TERA framework, Terra, TERA. And so T stands for team or tribe. And so that's, do you have a sense that you're all playing on the same team, that you're all moving in the same direction? If so, you're more likely to feel psychologically safe. Then E stands for expectation. And if anyone's ever said to you before, oh, we need to talk, but they've never told you why, most likely you felt a bit worried because you're thinking, have I done something wrong? And so expectation needs to be that people feel that there's a positive expectation. They're not afraid because they know that the outcome of whatever conversation they have will be a positive one. Then R stands for uh, rank. So rank is, do you make me feel small? Do you diminish me when you speak to me? And one way to get around that and make people feel not diminished is by asking questions. So instead of saying, well, this is what you've done, you might say, well, this, how do you feel about the situation? So asking questions is fantastic. So yeah, that's part of this coaching habit model, the Terra model for psychological safety. And the last part, A, is all about, do you feel you have autonomy? Do you feel that you are being sort of tossed around in the wind, or can you actually set your direction yourself? So again, the more autonomy you have, the safer you feel. So I think in combination with listening, it's all very well to get people to try and speak up, but you've got to create an environment where they feel safe. Because you often hear about these sort of town halls where they ask people who are perhaps in minority groups to speak up to the whole organization, and they're taking great risks. They're not feeling very safe, but they speak up anyway, and then either they're penalized for it or nothing happens. And so it's so important that we listen and we create safety. So what I'd quite like to do now is just to have a quick exercise for people. And in your groups, I'd like you to have a think. There's a slide there with, I think it's slide number 8, please, Margot. And on slide number 8, it's asking you to rate yourself and your organization in terms of psychological safety. And, it'd be great to just take 5 minutes or a few minutes on your tables and just think about, is there safety in your organization? Is there a culture of listening? Do leaders hear and act, or do they maybe listen and ignore? And what needs changing? What can you do? So just a few questions to just have a think about and perhaps a chat about with each other on your tables before we come back together again. So Davina or Margot, I'll let you direct people because I have no idea how they need to work on their tables.
Yeah, you should be able to just talk quite easily to the people sitting near you. If you're on a table on your own, then please feel free to just click on a chair that's empty on a table that does have some people on it, and then you will be able to join in those conversations. Obviously, unmute. We can't all hear you. The only people that can hear you are the people on your table.
shall we say just a minute or so left for the interactive exercise? It would be lovely if you would perhaps pop into the chat a few of the points that came up in your conversation so that we can all be privy to what you talked about because I'd love to know. But yeah, let's just say a minute or so more to wind up these conversations. And if one of you would just pop into the chat for your conversation, what you discussed, that'd be brilliant. Or what conclusions you drew, or how much your organisation creates psychological safety, or perhaps it doesn't. Okay. Vina, is there something we officially do to put the brakes on that?
Yeah, we just start talking, and it's as simple as that. Hopefully, people have popped some stuff in the chat. I was just thinking whilst that exercise was going on, actually, Shola, it's it's a very different world now, isn't it? With us all working virtually, or the majority of us having been working virtually for quite some time now. Is empathy different? Is being empathetic different now that we're not all physically in the same room together?
Yeah, great point, Davina. And I think part of it is no spontaneity. So before, if we wanted to have a conversation with someone or just find out how they were doing, we could just walk over to their desk or, sort of catch them when they were having a drink or something, or in the kitchen at the company. And we can't do that anymore. So if we do actually want to reach out and have a conversation with somebody, it's almost like we need to, sort of play our cards in a very obvious way. And people often say this to me in sessions. They say, well, now I've actually got to be more vulnerable and more courageous by actually reaching out and saying to somebody, well, how are you doing? Or we haven't spoken in a while. What's going on with you? So I do think in a way, there's nothing wrong with being more courageous and more vulnerable. I think it's good for all of us, but it forces our hand to some extent to have to do that rather than being able to be, just have those conversations that just come and go. Then I think there's a lot of people who've joined companies who have never even met their colleagues before face to face. And it's very hard to build relationships with people that you've never seen, never been in the same room as. So there's a lot of different ways that it has become quite a bit harder to be more empathetic at work.
Sorry, I was on mute there. So what should we do? How do we maintain or increase our empathy despite the restrictions that we're all living under?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that we can do is, and she had to put a good comment in here. She's put, leaders have to rely on allies within the organization to relay the feedback from employees to leaders, owners, and managers. Absolutely. So we're not getting as much direct information as we used to, perhaps. But one thing that we can do is in meetings, for example, we can kick off a meeting by asking people, well, how do you feel about this project? Just put simply a traffic light color, red, yellow, green, just pop it into the chat, or asking them for one word about how do you feel, good, bad, upset, whatever, frustrated. So even things like that, if you're managing a big group, you can still sort of take a pulse really on what's going on. Then you can also have non-work related meetings, so just a way to hang out and get to know your colleagues. And I know that there's a lot of fatigue around online meetings now, so it's got to be done with sensitivity, but there's certainly an opportunity for that. And then also one of my clients, they decided they called it a connection wave. and they sort of named it after the Mexican wave, where they said that each person, for a period of, I think for 7 days, they urged everybody in the company to reach out to one person they hadn't met before and have some sort of conversation, email, chat, whatever, and to do that every day for 7 days, just to really sort of boost and stimulate those connections taking place. So there are things that can be done. Even things like having empathy training can really help people become a bit more vulnerable and courageous.
That's really good advice, Shola. I'm just noticed the time now. It's 22. I wonder if we should move to Q&A, because I'm sure people have got questions to ask, and I want to give you plenty of time for that. For the Q&A, all you need to do is press the question mark. I can't see the question mark, but hopefully you all can. Do you have a question mark on your screen? Oh yeah, raise hand at the bottom there, bottom right of your screens. If you press the question mark, then Margot will hand the microphone to you, and then you'll be able to speak, and we'll all be able to hear you, and that should work quite simply. So if anyone has a question, if they just raise their hand using that icon. Oh, is any? I can't see anyone's hand raised, so give us a shout if you have a question. If not, I also have some questions, but I'm sure if for any reason you can't work out how to raise your hand, then feel free to put your question in the chat as well. That will be perfectly fine as well. So whilst we're maybe waiting for people to either raise their hands or pop it in the chat, Shola, do you think there's any limitations to empathy? I mean, is it really I guess the what do you call it, the golden path? Is it all things for everyone, or can it only get us so far?
I think it's super important, but we have to recognize as human beings we do have our limitations in the way that we behave. So, for example, humans are biased. And so what that means is I'm more likely to be empathetic towards somebody who's similar to me or perhaps had a similar upbringing or similar background, just because it's much easier to tap into what they're feeling and what I'll understand them more. So we've got to be aware of our biases and natural prejudices. In addition to that, it could be that a company might say, well, we've done the empathy training, everyone should be able to go off and have great relationships now. But obviously, having empathy skills is no replacement for having equitable policies in place at your company. So it's super important, however empathetic people are, these sorts of human things will come up, bias, prejudice, etc. Faulty decision making. So we've got to make sure that we've got the right policies and procedures in place.
Thank you. Any questions from anyone on the tables? No, I don't think there are. In which case, what we could do now is we could move to networking, which means that Shola will be able to come and sit on the tables with you, and you'll be able to just have a chat with her directly and ask questions that way, which can be nice, and obviously continue on chatting with people on the table and what have you. If you want to go ahead and do that, before we do that, actually though, Shola, shall we just move to just talking a little bit about the things that if people are interested in, the services that you offer, how people can get in contact with you, and that kind of thing. And I'm just going to leave the room just momentarily so that I can put the appropriate slide up with all of your contact details.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, if anybody does want to get in touch, I've got a free guide, first of all, which is I think slide number 10, which is called Preparing for Empathy. So this guide just kind of gives you some tips as to how you can become more empathetic, how you can get ready for sort of DEI and empathy training at your company. And so you can pick that up. I'll pop that link into the chat. But if you go to sholakay.com/empathy now, then you can pick that up. I'm just popping in empathy now. And also, if anyone wants to chat about empathy, I know there were no questions today, but some of you may have questions or be thinking about an empathy program. So please do get in touch. You can find me at sholak.com, or just, you can even go to my calendar and just book 10 minutes on your calendar. So I've put that link in there as well. But yeah, I mean, it's such an important topic, and it's a huge area, and it has repercussions on so many different parts of our working and personal life. And just a couple of days ago, somebody said that she tried empathic listening with one of her adult children, and she said that she had a breakthrough in the relationship just because she, instead of being a sort of overbearing mother telling her son what to do all the time, she just said, "Oh, well, how do you feel about that?" And the relationship just went to a new place. So just even simply trying empathic listening, you might find that it just changes things for you beyond your expectations.
That's so wonderful, Shola. Thank you so much. I think Davina's just got that slide up there. Perfect.
Wonderful.
Yep, I've got it working now. Sorry, that took me a little while to fiddle around in the background, but that's all the contact details for Shola there. So let's give you a huge round of applause before we move on to networking.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we have got, I think, another 15 minutes or so. So feel free to move around the tables and chat, and I'll officially bring it to the end on the hour so that people can get off to their next meetings. I know, especially if you're in the US, you want to be quite as relaxed as us in the UK, and I have no idea what time it is in Argentina, I'm afraid, but I'm guessing a very different time to what we're in.
Perfect. Let me go and join some people. Thank you so much, Davina, for having me as well. It's been really fun being here.
Oh, you're welcome. We've really enjoyed having you. You've been a fantastic speaker. And if anyone's not on our Slack channel, there should be details of the emails that you've received about the events, but feel free to join. If you haven't got those details, you can just reply to any email that we've sent you, and we'll come right back with all of those details so we can continue the conversation on there as well.